of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. I'd like to say that again before we begin our sermon time together. This is one of my favorite seasons in the church year. Today is All Saints' Day. When we come together as a church, when we join with Christians and traditions around the world in honoring all the people in life who have encouraged our faith, held us in love, or aided us along the way. So many cultures have this kind of ancestral honoring this fall, don't they? In Cambodia, we have Chumban, and in Mexico, they celebrate Dia de los Muertos. I'm excited to learn what the traditions are in traditional Japanese culture, but today in our Christian church, we celebrate All Saints' Day. When we celebrate All Saints' Day, we're not just celebrating those who have already been received into Jesus' arms. We're also celebrating saints that are still living. Today, we get to bear witness to this great, shimmering cloud of saints around us. Shimmering, I like to picture it like a constellation of stars that connects us across time and space. Today, I'm remembering my grandparents, my mother's parents. I'm remembering my grandpa's hands. They were so big. I remember thinking when I was a kid, how do you have hands that big? And they were rough because he farmed his whole life. And yet they were so gentle as he took out little seedlings to plant in his garden. He couldn't stop farming, even when he retired. He's the reason I know how to grow vegetables. So I remember Grandpa Bob today. I'm remembering Grandma Julie, how when I hugged her, I couldn't feel more safe. And she always smelled like clean soap and fresh laundry. I'm remembering a dear friend my age who died way too soon, who used to play the clarinet. He was training to become a professional clarinetist, and he played so beautifully. I'm not being dramatic. I thought it was a foretaste of what music in heaven sounded like. I'm remembering him today. Who are you remembering today? What saints are in your life, living or dead? In the Jewish tradition, there is a saying that I love. I've worked with many rabbis, and I learned it from them, and it's, may their memory be for blessing. May their memory be for blessing. As I've grown and I've laid beloved church members to rest, as I've been a pastor, I've done many funerals, and I've said goodbye to friends and family. I've tried to make peace with grief. When grief comes to visit, I try to set a table in my heart to invite grief to sit down and ask me, what does it want to teach me? What blessings does it offer? This is not always possible. Sometimes grief is just hard. Even if we've never lost anyone, grief is hard. There's other kinds of grief. I call it living grief. It's the grief that you live with when someone in your life is estranged or suffers from chronic illness or has cancer or addiction, or the heartbreaking decline of memory loss. It's a living grief, a grief for a living person. I think to be human is just to feel grief from time to time, and some seasons in life more often than not. Sometimes, however, when grief comes to visit, I like to picture it like a familiar cat. You know Pastor Megan loves cats. I like to picture it like a familiar cat winding itself around my legs. And sometimes God gives me the strength to pick it up, to hold grief close, and to ask it what blessing or things it might want to teach me today. In those moments, by God's grace and strength, grief has brought me memories I thought I had forgotten. The way my grandma used to be able to make perfectly round cookies without a cookie cutter. They were perfectly round. The way my grandpa would throw his head back when he laughed and his blue eyes would light up. I remember these things I thought I had forgotten. And I'm blessed by these memories, connecting me to those I've loved and lost across time and space. That brings me to our gospel story today. We could spend a sermon on each of these Beatitudes and on each of the woes and on the little part at the end. There is so much to dig into in the Beatitudes today. But I would like us to focus on the very first Beatitude. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. In the ancient Greek, poor doesn't just refer to poor in monetary ways, like not having enough money or having enough material possessions. Poor can refer to feeling deficient or lost in any way. It could be poor in spirit, poor in heart, lonely, afraid, anxious, feeling lost, longing to be found. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been poor in spirit? Maybe today's that day for you. And so today, we get to examine this beatitude through this lens of what does it mean to be poor in spirit. There are times, I will admit, I have read this section of the Gospels and felt frustrated. I have said, Jesus, it is so painful sometimes to be human. It is so painful to live with grief. I do not feel blessed when I am reviled or excluded or defamed or hungry. How is this a blessing? However, the longer I have walked with grief, the more I have borne witness to something very strange. The persistent presence of God's blessing and goodness in our lives. This persistent goodness and presence that often comes to us through those saints around us who have loved us well. The longer I have walked with Jesus and held up my grief to him in prayer, the more I've noticed that Jesus has a funny way of being able to take my grief and use it to reveal some of the most heartbreakingly beautiful moments in life. One example I'll share with you is on my ordination day 7 years ago. I was getting ready to go up to the altar and to kneel before the bishop. And I was missing my grandparents so much. They had helped raise me. They were like a second mom and dad, and they had died a little over a year before. And in the front row, I saw my chubby baby, Saya, just a little tiny guy at the time. And I was so heartbroken they never got to meet him and that they weren't there on this day that I had worked for so long. And I remember going up to the altar and kneeling before the bishop. And the bishop invited everyone, all of my family and friends, to come and place their hands on my shoulders. And as I was kneeling, looking up at them and praying and saying my vows, something amazing happened. I felt the presence of my grandpa right here. I could almost picture his smile. He's missing so many teeth. Just a big, toothless smile right here at my left. And my grandma's presence, I felt her so powerfully at my right. And in my spirit, or maybe my imagination, but it felt so real, they were laying their hands on me as well and saying, we are here. We are a part of this moment for you. Nothing can separate love. Not time and space, not distance, we are here. And that is when I realized, in a way I hadn't before, how the kingdom of heaven can break into our earthly reality. How maybe Jesus made us this way on purpose, made us with the ability to feel grief, because Jesus knew that so much of life would be so hard. So much of life would be loss and longing. But through Christ, through his love and grace, we are able to have our grief transformed into something holy, something beautiful. That maybe God could transform the loss and the pain and the sorrow in our lives through something glorious from time to time. That maybe grief becomes something that becomes our witness to love that refuses to die. That maybe Jesus can transform our longing into a reminder of the promise that we will be filled one day. Maybe sooner than we expect. That is not to say that the hard days aren't hard sometimes. But our gospel today reminds us that the kingdom of heaven isn't just some consolation prize for those who have suffered the most, but rather Jesus' promise that our suffering is not in vain. Our suffering is not in vain because of how we have loved and lived, and we are able to bear witness to the kingdom's presence here and now, in this moment and the next, and not just at the end of our lives. Rabbi Shagras Simmons suggests that blessing, the word blessing, can also be used as awareness. A blessing was given in ancient times so that people would become aware or reminded of the presence of God in their lives. So when we hear these Beatitudes today, blessed are you, Jesus is saying he wishes to bless us with a perpetual awareness of the kingdom of heaven among us. My last quick example I'll share is I used to do a class on the theology of grief with my confirmation students. I would light a row of candles on the altar, and we would start confirmation class. And as the sun went down and the lights were still on, it was almost like we didn't notice the candles because the room was full of light. But as the sun went down, the candles began to get brighter and brighter. And as we talked about grief and we unpacked what does it mean to be believers and to have grief, I would have my students turn down the lights. And little by little, the students said, wow, the candles are so bright. How didn't we notice them before? And as the class started to end, I would have them turn off the lights completely, and all that would be left was this brilliant glow from the candles. And even then, I would have students go up and blow out the candles one by one until just one was left. One candle shining in the dark. And we wondered to ourselves, how is it that one candle can be so brilliant, so bright? And that's when we talked about how this is the way that God operates. This is the way that blessedness works. It's God's light showing us the way. God's light using our darkness to shine even brighter. So now, as you go from this place and into this week, Jesus is asking you to remember that wherever you are feeling poor or deficient this week, know that that is where God can use your ache, your pain, your longing to bring light to your life. Somehow, some way, this is the promise that we remember today. That God will continue to bring people to your life who will light up your life with blessedness. That he will continue to guide your way with his blessedness. May the blessedness of Jesus meet you today in memory, in storytelling, as you are surrounded by the great presence of the cloud of witnesses that we remember today. The cloud of witnesses who even now bless you with their presence, who bless our lives with knowledge and certainty of the life to come and the kingdom of heaven which is around us now.